Ah. So it's Anita. I'm going to have to go out and come back in again. My video won't turn on. So I'm going and then I'll be back.
Good morning, Val.
I just sent Kathy a message which you can ignore.
Okay, everybody, good morning. You are now live on YouTube. And the meeting is being recorded.
I'm the chair, Councillor Kathy Gardner. I'll just hold on for a couple more moments because people are still joining the meeting. Okay, I think we're ready to make a start. Good morning. Welcome to East Devon District Council's virtual Scrutiny Committee meeting on the 21st of May 2020. I'm your chair, Councillor Kathy Gardner. I would also like to welcome anyone watching the meeting via the live stream. All participants here today are taking part remotely, and as well as being live streamed, the committee is being recorded. So please bear this in mind throughout. May I remind members that the Code of Conduct applies throughout this meeting. We also reserve the right to remove and disconnect any participant who is disrupting the meeting by whatever means. As this committee is dependent on internet connection and a power supply, in the event of a break in the internet connection or a power cut, please bear with us as we try to reconnect. After 15 minutes, if we are not able to reconnect, we will consider the meeting adjourned and reconvene at a later date. Please check the committee page on our website for details. And most importantly, for participants, please make sure all microphones are muted when you are not speaking to avoid background noise. Keep points short and do not repeat points that have already been made. And please do not interrupt other speakers. If you wish to comment, please raise your electronic blue hand and wait to be called. All councillors have been sent an agenda for today's meeting. Any members of the public who want to view the agenda can do so by visiting our website, eastdevon.gov.uk. I will now start the committee by asking one of the Democratic Services officers to do the roll call of everyone here present. Can you please now unmute your microphone? And when you hear your name, please confirm by saying present. When you have confirmed that you're present, please mute your microphone again. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Kathy Gardner. Councillor Kathy Gardner.
Present.
Councillor Kim Bloxham has sent apologies. Councillor Colin Brown. Councillor Colin Brown. No. Councillor Maddie Chapman. Councillor Maddie Chapman. Councillor Chapman, if you're on mute, could you unmute your microphone, please?
Yes.
Councillor Ian Chubb.
Yeah, I'm here. And Colin Brown sends his apologies.
Thank you. Councillor Andrew Coleman.
Present.
Councillor Bruce Desarum.
Present.
Councillor Paul Jarvis has sent apologies. Councillor Vicky Johns.
Present.
Councillor Tony McCollum.
Present.
Councillor Kathy McLaughlin has sent apologies. Councillor Chris Pepper. Councillor Chris Pepper. No. Councillor Val Ranger.
Present.
Councillor Jack Rowland has sent apologies. Councillor Eleanor Rylance. Councillor Eleanor Rylance.
Eleanor's sent in a message saying that she's having communication problems, will be with us soon.
Thank you. Senior Management Team, Chief Executive Mark Williams.
Yes.
Strategic Lead Governance and Licensing Henry Gordon Lennox.
Yes, I'm here.
Strategic Lead Health, Housing and Environment John Golding.
Yeah, I'm present.
Strategic Lead Finance Simon Davey.
Yeah, present.
Strategic Lead Organisational Development and Transformation Karen Simpkin. Present. Thank you. Democratic Services Officers Susan Howell.
Present.
Chris Lane.
You said present, Debbie.
Yes, thank you.
Present.
And me, Sarah Jenkins. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Can I remind everybody who's not going to speak to mute their microphones again, just in case? Thank you. Agenda item 1, public speaking. There are no members of the public registered to speak. Agenda item 2, minutes of the previous meeting. That's on pages 3 to 7 if you're looking at the agenda. If anyone has a comment on the last set of minutes, please make this comment by raising your electronic blue hand. I can see actually that there is a blue hand raised by Councillor Eileen Wragg.
Yes, Chairman, are you going to have a list of people who are attending?
That's a very good question. Democratic Services, what's the answer to that question?
We will have a list, but we don't need to roll call it for the purposes of making sure we're quorum. But there will be a list recorded in the minutes.
Thank you. So no other blue hands raised for the minutes. I will take this as an indication that you all agree to the minutes of the previous meeting. Thank you. The minutes of the previous meeting are agreed. I wanted to include an update at this point about the status of the Queen's Drive development following the call-in at the previous Scrutiny Committee meeting. And I can confirm that the item in the minutes still stands, that this development and the marketing exercise at Queen's Drive is still on hold until Cabinet is able to meet again. So if you just refer to what's noted in the minutes, that is still there as it stands at that point. So I hope that reassures members from Exmouth and residents who were wondering what had happened. Agenda item 3, apologies. We've had our apologies from Councillor Kathy McLaughlin, Councillor Kim Bloxham, Councillor Paul Jarvis, Councillor Jack Rowland, and was there anyone else giving apologies this morning?
Could I add
Councillor
that,
Colin Brown.
could I add that Councillor Eleanor Rylance has sent another WhatsApp message saying that her signal is too slow, but she is trying. So if she doesn't appear, I think we can accept that that is an apology for non-appearance.
She can dial in, can't she, on audio to participate, I think, if she wants to.
I'll message her back now.
Thank you. Item 4, declarations of interest. This again will be done by roll call. Can I ask the officer to please take the roll call?
Chairman, Councillor Kathy Gardner.
Nothing to declare.
Councillor Kim Bloxham, apologies. Councillor Colin Brown, apologies. Councillor Maddie Chapman. Councillor Chapman, if you could unmute your microphone, please.
Nothing to declare.
Thank you. Councillor Ian Chubb.
County councillor. Yeah, county councillor.
Thank you. Councillor Andrew Coleman.
Nothing to declare.
Councillor Brewster Sarum.
Nothing to declare, Chairman.
Councillor Paul Jarvis has sent apologies. Councillor Vicky Johns.
I don't know if I need to declare this or not. I'm director of the Ottery Community Volunteers Group, so I don't know if I need to declare that with number 8, the COVID-19 response, or if that's just with East Devon District Council.
Thank you. Councillor Tony McCollum.
Yeah, similar to Vicky, I'm a volunteer with the Random Kitchen at Honiton, and I'm also acting treasurer for that event at the moment.
Thank you. Councillor Kathy McLaughlin has sent apologies. Councillor Chris Pepper. Not here. Councillor Val Ranger.
Nothing to declare apart from I am on a community support list for COVID-19.
Thank you. Councillor Jack Rowland has sent apologies, and Councillor Eleanor Rylance is still not in the meeting. No. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Agenda item 5, matters of urgency. There are no matters of urgency to discuss. Agenda item 6, confidential and exempt items. There are no confidential and exempt items which officers recommend should be dealt with in this way. Agenda item 7, decisions made by Cabinet called in by members for scrutiny in accordance with the overview and scrutiny procedure rules. There are no items identified. Agenda item 8, update on the COVID-19 response by East Devon District Council. We're going to have a verbal update on the COVID-19 response from the Chief Executive, Mark Williams, and there will be opportunity for questions from members. What I'd like to try and do is to take the questions in sections so that we don't have to wait for everybody to speak at the end. The Chief Executive will be giving the statement in sections, and I'll keep an idea, I'll keep a view of how many hands have gone up and perhaps stop Mark Williams and allow questions to be asked. So try and be patient with your questions and make notes. If there are any other topics to ask on this subject, that's absolutely fine. Please keep those questions to the end and people will do their best to answer. I'd also like to say that what we're looking for here is gaps in the response, anything that we're worried about in case there's a second spike of infection, areas that we might need to do better next time. I know most of it has been wonderful. There's been a lot of effort gone in. Work has been fantastic from lots of people, but we don't want to spend too much time praising. We know that is good, but this is really to focus on any gaps and any concerns that we have. I'll hand over to the Chief Executive. Thank you.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. So just by way of a little bit of recap, going back to March of this year, the government impressed upon local government that there were 3 key tasks that it wanted local government to get involved in. One of these tasks was supporting adult social care, including hospital discharge, and that was something that's led by the County Council as the Social Care Authority. And then 2 of relevance for the District Council were supporting the economy and also supporting the vulnerable to stay at home. So what I was planning to do was just chat a little bit about what we've done in terms of supporting the economy, and then a bit about supporting the vulnerable. And we can include in that the work that John Golding's team has done around housing the homeless and rough sleepers. And then the third sort of section would be just a general comment, if you like, about the impact of lockdown on the council and the services that we've delivered. And then on the back of that, any questions that flow, from that sort of general point, if you like. So if we start with the economy, obviously, it has had a big impact on the local economy. And yesterday, I think I sent out to you the latest details of the universal credit claims across Devon, and particularly within East Devon. And you can see from April, there's a dramatic increase in claims for universal credit. What we were asked to do specifically was to administer a grant scheme that the government introduced, which was designed to support a majority of small and medium-sized businesses. There were other schemes too, and they were around business rate relief for the year, but that was relatively straightforward. It was a lot of work, but it was relatively straightforward in terms of what actually needed to be done. But the big task was to get a team together, which we did through revenues and benefits, and also the economy and regeneration team, was to get them together, design a system, design online forms, and design a whole series of communications so that we could get the money out of the door as quickly as possible that the government passed through to us. So we were granted approximately £50 million, and on the back of that, set up a system of paying claimants as quickly as possible. In the main, I think that has been run successfully. There have been some complaints, but those complaints have been from businesses who weren't eligible for the scheme, and I'll touch on that in a minute. But those businesses that were eligible, the vast majority of feedback has been that they were very pleased to get the money quickly. It was for several, described as a lifesaver, and I think from a reputational point of view, it did the council some good, because there were certainly reports from elsewhere in the county where other councils hadn't been able to sort of administer the scheme as quickly as we had. So in terms of that scheme, the last figure I saw was that we were at something like 87% of all the money had been distributed. We are chasing up those businesses that haven't applied, and there's a team of two or three members of staff, depending on workload, that are phoning around the businesses that haven't applied, and either seeking confirmation that they don't intend to apply, or pressing them that they really do need to apply. I think we sort of set ourselves an informal target of running down the scheme by the end of May, in the sense that we'd like to feel that that sort of mandatory scheme that the government required of us, there is no reason that we can't get the money out of the door by the end of May, assuming that those businesses that want the money apply for the money. We have had quite a few, I haven't got the exact number, but it can be given. We've had a few into the low hundreds of businesses that say they don't actually want the money. So that is useful, and I'll explain why in a minute. So in terms of the mandatory scheme, we're almost there, and we've distributed the vast majority of the money that was required of us. What that leads on to, though, and I think this will be something that will be of relevance and interest to members, is that the feedback the government got was that there were many businesses that had fallen through the gaps, if you like, in the scheme. And I know that several councillors, contacted me direct about that. Only because you're next to me, I can see Councillor Ranger. She raised the issue of a local business in Venottery, I think it was. But let's say councillors from across the piece were saying, well, this business doesn't seem eligible. What can we do about it? So on the back of that, and that was a common issue that was reported not just across Devon but across the country. There was quite a bit of lobbying that went on through the LGA and through local MPs to say that the business scheme needed to be extended. So the government has responded to that, but my fear is that they've responded in a way that's probably going to leave more people unhappy than happy. So the reason I say that is that the government has capped the next iteration of the scheme at 5% of the grant that we originally got. So you're talking about circa £2.5 million that will be available from that scheme. And it's also said that it's a discretionary scheme. So it's actually, if you like, passing the buck to the local councils to make the decisions about who can or who cannot benefit from that scheme. So if you were to look at the details of the scheme, it's primarily aimed at small and micro businesses, businesses with relatively high ongoing fixed property related costs, businesses which can demonstrate they've suffered a significant fall in income, and businesses which occupy property or part of a property with a rateable value of below £51,000. And they've also asked us to prioritise small businesses in shared offices or other flexible workspaces, regular market traders with fixed building costs such as rent, who do not have their own business rates assessment, bed and breakfasts which pay council tax instead of business rates, and charity properties in receipt of charitable business rates relief, which would otherwise have been eligible for other rate reliefs. So the likely number of businesses that could potentially benefit from that scheme is going to be quite significant. Some of the work we've done suggests that, you know, we've got in the range of 200 charities in the district. We're certainly aware of 57 registered bed and breakfasts. We're still working on numbers for the other areas. Then, of course, it's not exclusively limited to those 4 priority areas. It covers a whole wider range of businesses. So the worry is twofold. One, it's discretionary. So there will be people who won't be happy about that. And 2, the likely amount of money to go round means that whereas there was an expectation that if you qualified under the original scheme, you could get a cash grant of £10,000 or £25,000, the likelihood is that for this scheme, actually we're probably talking about grants of maybe in the region of £1,000 or £2,000. So there's been a Team Devon approach to it, and a paper is being prepared by the benefits managers primarily into how this scheme can operate and be implemented. That's still in the process of preparation, and we think it's unlikely that the scheme will be launched before the first week in June. I've got a meeting later today about it, but my preference is also that actually it does get member sign-off, because the discretionary nature of the scheme to me suggests that actually this isn't something that officers particularly want to do without member sign-off for the discretionary element. It's one thing doing a statutory scheme, if you like, where actually there's no flexibility. The government has set the regulations and we just implement those regulations. It's a different thing, I think, from my perspective, where you've got a discretionary scheme. I think that needs a level of member endorsement, but we should be in a position, bearing in mind the extraordinary general meetings next week, for that to happen in the first week of June, and then we can go on from there. So I'll stop there. That's the update with regard to the economy.
Any questions from committee members or other members on that section? I see a blue hand from Councillor Val Ranger.
Thank you. As the with the discretionary fund, presumably then that requires businesses to approach East Devon rather than with the statutory fund, where I think East Devon contacted businesses that were eligible. Is that correct? That for the discretionary fund, businesses will have to approach East Devon District Council?
So yes and no. I mean, we will be doing comms to encourage businesses to apply, and where we're aware of businesses, we will be contacting them. It'll be a bit of both, as it was for the original scheme, that we'll be contacting them, but we're expecting that the publicity that will surround the launch of the scheme will encourage businesses to apply to us. But you know, the point you've raised is a valid one, because I think expectation management around this is going to be very important.
Thank you. I think Councillor Eleanor Rylance was next. Eleanor's disappeared again. Okay, if Eleanor comes back, that's fine. Councillor Brewster Sarum.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I had a very quick question. You talk about the discretionary scheme. What is going to be the criteria for this? Because obviously, presumably, you'd have to work out a sort of basis of who has suffered the most impact to their various businesses. Because obviously, you're saying the money is going to vary between £1,000 or say £2,000 as opposed to the previous cash payments. So that was really what I wanted to ascertain. If you could be so kind, thank you.
Yeah. So the thinking at the moment is that you know, we want to try and make sure that the money goes round or stretches as far as it can, and we obviously also don't want to spend all the money at once and then find that you've got, you know, needy businesses coming forward who are perhaps a bit slow off the mark. So the thinking, and that's all it is at the moment, it's not been decided. The thinking is that there may be a series of calls for applications. So it may be that we prioritise a particular tranche, we look at how they come forward, and then we assess, you know, how successful that part has been. As I say, we haven't got there yet. I think we were meant to have had more guidance issued last night, but I haven't seen it yet. So there is still this issue of making sure that what we ultimately come up with complies with government guidance.
Thank you. Councillor Vicky Johns.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute. It's just a quick question, and it might be something that can't be answered, and it's one of those things that's out on the news, etc. So I just wanted to clarify it. Apparently, you know, people that register their second homes as an Airbnb or something are also entitled to apply for the £10,000 grant. Obviously, there's a little bit of a loophole there, and this is unprecedented circumstances. I'm just wondering whether or not we're aware of how many possible there are in our area that are applying for something that really they shouldn't be getting.
Okay, so it's a value statement as to whether or not they really should or shouldn't be getting it. The government has said that they're entitled to it, and that's because they've elected, if you like, to pay business rates, and they have proved, I use that term relatively loosely, I think, proved to the valuation office that they're available for, I think it's something like at least 140 days a year for letting. Simon's here, he may have the exact figure, but my understanding it's something like hundreds of second homes are potentially eligible, but I don't know the exact figure in terms of how many we've paid out, but Simon might be able to help.
No, I can't. Sorry, Mark. I don't know the exact numbers, but you're right. We're aware of quite a few that we've paid. And as you say, the guidance was clear. If they were paying business rates classified as a business, then we have no choice but to pay it.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands up at the moment, but I'd quite like to just confirm how many grants we issued to businesses in the first round. You said 80% of the money had been paid out, but how many businesses did that cover?
I think it's something like 3,700. That's the figure I've got in the back of my head. I don't know if Simon can clarify.
Libby will, I'm sure she's on the call.
Yeah, just give me a second and I'll get the figures. Sorry, I have got the spreadsheet to hand.
In the meantime, perhaps I'll ask Mark Williams a second question. The discretionary payments to small and micro businesses, have they had any advance notice that this is going to potentially be available to them? And how are we going to be communicating such a sort of a complicated message to quite a wide range of very small businesses? Are there any thoughts about that?
The advanced communication will have been the one that the government has issued. Interestingly, most of the local feedback seems to be that they're prepared to wait and see, if you like. But when we've got a scheme that members are happy to sign off, then we will go through a process of contacting those that we're aware of, as well as doing a general comms piece to encourage them to apply.
Thank you. Libby, did you have that number?
Yes, I do. We've paid 3,369 businesses.
Thank you very much. Hands gone back up from Councillor Eleanor Rylance. Are you there, Eleanor?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. I firstly wanted to declare an interest because I have been a recipient of one of these grants on the holiday let, which is my main income. If it can reassure councillors and members of the public, when COVID struck, I had a number of tradespeople working here, and my whole income for the entire year disappeared in the space of 10 days. And so I have to say that the grant was extremely welcome because it enabled me to pay off those local tradespeople. So that's my declaration of interest. My question for Mark is, once we have established, I mean, is there anything that we can publicise on social media, re the micro businesses and the small, you know, the discretionary grants scheme that's coming up? Do we have a press release at the moment which people might be tentatively able to apply through that we can publicise?
No, is the answer to that. I mean, the application will be an online application, and for the reasons I stated earlier, there are likely to be more disappointed people than there are happy people about this scheme. So my view, my advice, if you like, is that it would be premature to start putting out information which may raise expectations that they could be eligible for sums of £10,000, sums of £25,000, if actually it means that when we look at it, you know, we are only talking about sums of £2,000, or maybe £5,000 might actually be a big grant under this. As I say, you know, it's limited to just slightly more than £2.5 million, and that's not a lot to go around. Whether the government will increase it, so if there is, you know, more demand than we feel we can satisfy, and if the feedback is that, well, what's the point of applying for this if it's only, you know, a few £100 or £1,000 or £2,000, and I'm not saying that will be the reaction, but it might be from some, then obviously we'll make representations back to say it's insufficient. But it's interesting the way that, you know, the initial scheme was, I think, very generous for people, and the second scheme is not so generous. So you get this sense that, you know, the initial enthusiasm of government to spend what it takes, if you like, is now being tempered slightly by the amount of money that they are spending, for example, in the economy area on the furlough scheme, and the realization that actually, you know, this is costing the country a lot of money, which fundamentally that's money they're borrowing.
Okay, thank you. Last question on this topic, back to Councillor Ranger.
Yeah, so it's just that will we feed this back to the government, that this second tranche may appear to be inadequate and to still be leaving a big gap? When you think, for example, of all village halls, our little tiny Hertford Village Hall, you know, was offered the £10,000 business rate relief grant, which clearly we turned down. We make nothing like that normally, and certainly didn't lose that amount owing to COVID-19. So you're right, that gap between the original very generous offer and this latest offer, I think we do need to feed that back and say, you know, point out the gaps that are still there, that are really causing problems for businesses.
Yes, it's a good point. I mean, I have already done that. The Minister for Climate Change in BEIS, the Business Environment Initiative, I can't remember, the environment, was it? No, Enterprise Innovation and something. Anyway, BEIS, he was doing a call of all chief executives in the country. He started with the worst performers. So it was a call to say, why aren't you doing better? And I think my call was last Friday afternoon, which was well done, you know, you're doing a good job, etc., etc. But he asked for feedback, and the feedback was that, you know, I was very, very nervous about this discretionary scheme because, you know, everything I could see and everything I was being told by my officers was that, you know, we were being set up to fail on this. And he said, no, that's not the case. He's had that level of consistent feedback from everyone he's spoken to. So they're aware of it. I just don't know in the scheme of things quite how it's going to, you know, how high it's going to land in terms of something they want to address along with all the other things that they're currently trying to deal with as a result of this crisis.
Okay, thank you for questions on that topic. Right, we'll move on to the next part.
Fine, thank you. So the second part was the supporting the vulnerable. And I think it's fair to say that the initial stages proved to be very, very confusing and less than satisfactory for a lot of people, not just, you know, us in terms of administering a community hub. So you go back to the early days of the lockdown, and even before the early days of the lockdown, and the advice that was being given around self-shielding and things like that. The initial priority from the government was very much to do with protecting those who were clinically vulnerable. So the most likely to be affected because of their underlying health conditions. That was a national scheme and a nationally run scheme, primarily through the NHS and then through into the upper tier and the unitary authorities. And I'm sure there was correspondence, between councillors and myself in the early days about it, because some people were getting letters, other people weren't getting letters. Why weren't they getting letters? How could they register? And I think you'll have seen quite a few articles in the national press around, the GPs saying, well, they were asked to provide their data to prepare this national list. And actually, it's quite a difficult ask. I mean, there was one I was reading in the Guardian a couple of days ago where, the GP was explaining that, if someone's got asthma on their records, it's then still a judgment call to go into that patient's records and decide, is it of a level that requires them to be told they must shield, or is it at a level where they can sort of not reach that higher tier of required shielding? So that was frustrating at the start, and certainly the county council, I think, were figuratively, if not literally, tearing their hair out in terms of the quality of the data that they were getting from the government, and it's still an issue in terms of the data that's still coming through. So having said that, of course, then the government moved into this requirement of how we're going to look after those who are vulnerable, but not as clinically vulnerable as the initial tranche of people. And that's where they required of district councils particularly to set up a community hub. And the idea behind that community hub was to act as a facilitator and a guide to local community effort, which would be the primary vehicle for trying to make sure that vulnerable people within our towns and our parishes could have some recourse to help and assistance. So that was set up promptly. We were able to reallocate staff primarily in the housing team into a new role of a hubster. And those hubsters, we set up a telephone service and we publicised the telephone service, and have been dealing with about 40 to 50 calls every day for a fair few weeks now, where we've been able to help either directly or through referring on to a local community organisation. So I know most, if not all of you, were or are involved in one way in your local communities in terms of facilitating those local organisations. And I think, it's been reasonably successful here. I think that is possibly to do with the fact that, generally speaking, the Southwest and then particularly Devon and Cornwall have got off lightly in terms of the level of infections and the level of deaths. But nevertheless, we have been able to facilitate this service. I think what it's shown in terms of some of the anecdotal feedback we've had from the staff is that, it's a good social type service that we're providing, because as well as, helping point and direct people to who they could perhaps contact for assistance with food or collecting prescriptions, actually a lot of people, they are lonely, being self-isolated. They do feel somewhat estranged because they cannot, necessarily contact their family in person, or don't get to see their neighbours and all that type of thing. So it has been a bit of a lifeline for people generally in terms of saying that yes, I can phone the council and get some reassurance if I don't actually need actual practical help. So by and large, the hub is working well. There are still issues about how it interacts with the national scheme, because the county council is still getting regular updates of data from the NHS and from the government about the clinically vulnerable, and we're then sort of picking up those that the county council aren't sure about and trying to do local engagement, and that's particularly around those who are medically vulnerable but haven't registered or engaged with the national process. So the county council will phone them in the first instance, and if they still can't contact them, then they'll farm it out to the districts, and we'll see what we can do with our databases and our data records to try and make contact with vulnerable people. So aligned to that have been a number of grants that we've set up locally. So we have our sort of food bank fund, which we're administering. There's also the joint fund, the COVID hardship fund that we're administering with the county council. not as many applications as I thought there might be, but then maybe the demand isn't quite as great as it might be, for example, if, as the chairman alluded to, there's a potential second spike further down the road. But the money is still there. It's being slowly spent, and we'll try and make it go as far as we can. Aligned to that has been the work that John's team has done around housing the homeless, and particularly the rough sleepers. It was 3 or 4 weekends ago, I can't remember now, but the edict went out from government to say that all rough sleepers should be effectively taken off the street and put into accommodation, and we did that. We did that because we have regular engagement with those that we're aware of, and by and large, there's been a few issues around the ability of the rough sleepers to adapt to some of the accommodation requirements, if you like, or the accommodation expectations. There's a couple of characters in Honiton that we know well, and they've chosen to do it their own way, but we're in contact with them, and the help is there should they need it. So in terms then generally of supporting the vulnerable, the hub is going to be up and running for some time yet, I think. We haven't got any plans to sort of run it down, and I think it will be there for so long as it's required generally, and that will probably be until such time as there is a vaccine or the threat of the virus has passed, because it is a useful means of engaging with the community, and in a way it's sort of another service that we offer along with what I call the informal social care the customer service centre has always provided. So that's that with regard to that.
Okay, thank you. I have a question before I move on to the blue hands. You say about keeping the community hub operating for the foreseeable future. Do we need funding, additional funding to do that? Because obviously it's taking off as a resource at a time when we know we're going to be struggling for money. And has there been funding from central government to support the activities that we've been doing?
So we do need funding to continue, and there is still ongoing lobbying that's happening to get the government to understand the ongoing cost implications of providing an extra level of service, if you like, through COVID. The funding we've had to date from the government has been circa 1.5 million, and there's a live debate, I would say, in terms of what, if anything, more local government generally may get from government. I don't know if you watched the press conference, not yesterday, I think it was the day before, the one with George Eustace, the DEFRA, I think one of the DEFRA ministers. It was very interesting in answer to a question, I think, from a journalist from Portsmouth, that he was very clear that the government had made two sets of allocations, which they felt had dealt with the issue, and then he did specifically refer to the fact that all councils have got reserves, and they are there for emergencies, and this is an emergency. So I think government currently, at least, is expecting councils to take a view about what is the appropriate level of reserve, bearing in mind the need for councils to support their local communities. And some of you will be aware of conversations that we've been having via Simon around just how do we plan our way through the current financial year, excuse me, and then into the following financial year. So it's not a finished issue by any means, this issue of funding. There's ongoing lobbying. I know there are letters, they're still going from the county council on behalf of all of us, and we're making the case as often as we can, and the LGA is making the case as often as we can, is that you know, if the government doesn't find a way to provide help and assistance, you know, there are going to be a lot of councils struggling to provide normal services, quote unquote, let alone the additional services that's been asked of us. My personal view is I think something will happen, but I don't think it will be until the autumn time when perhaps the thing is settled down a bit. And then also maybe some of the assumptions we might have made locally about how our income is going to be affected may have been unduly prudent, I think is the way I would summarize it in the way that accountants speak. So, for example, you know, car park income, it did drop off a cliff, but, you know, people are flocking to the beaches because of the weather. You know, many people are ignoring lockdown, and the police, and that's why I put the piece on the update last night, the police are struggling to deal with the matter. So perversely, you know, the risk that comes with greater social contact does also actually mean that maybe our income won't be as badly affected as we perhaps feared. But you know, the consistent message has to be, you know, there is a requirement of government to recognise, you know, that councils have stepped up to the plate here, and you know, you can't just sort of ditch us, you know, and go back to, you know, well, I don't know. The way I sort of tend to describe it is that from 2002 to 2009, local government was part of the solution, and then from 2010, arguably, the public sector's been part of the problem. So I think the government's understanding that, you know, we are part of the solution, and that does mean that we need resourcing.
Let's certainly hope so. At the moment, I've got at least 5 blue hands. The first one on the list, Councillor Jess Bailey.
Thank you very much. So in terms of the council's response through its hub, I know that our officers have been working on a dashboard so that we can evaluate the calls and monitor the hub. And I wondered if it might be helpful if Karen Simpkin could speak a little bit about that to explain how that works. And one thing that I'm particularly mindful of is that we're obviously in this for the long term, and we need to kind of evaluate our kind of continuing response and the concerns that come through from the local hubs, from the at the lower level, at the parish and community hubs, so that as a district council we can kind of constantly monitor that. So that's one thing I wanted to say. The other things I want to say was I think that it would be good to kind of work on the clarity between the national scheme and our scheme, and the interface between those two. And in particular, I'm concerned about people falling through the net and how we make sure that that doesn't happen. It's, yeah, for me, it's building in resilience, so that, you know, we've got lots of volunteers on the ground feeding into their local community response, and how do we as a district council support them? How do we ensure that we provide an integrated response with the volunteers on the ground and our hub? So I think there's more work to be done on how we go forward with that, because it's a constantly evolving situation.
Yeah, I mean, Karen's on the call. She can comment if she wants to, but I don't think any of that is problematic. You know, it's interesting because, you know, you go back to end of March into April. I was anticipating something like, you know, 250 bodies a day coming out of the RD&E, and had no confidence that the community organisations would be able to survive if a lot of the volunteers, who in the main, you know, are in the third age, if you like, you know, might be incapacitated for one reason or another Fortunately, that hasn't happened, but I think we need to understand how might we deal with that if it were to happen. But Karen, I don't know if you want to come.
Is Karen there? It doesn't seem like we have Karen at the moment. We have a question from Councillor Eleanor Rylance.
Sorry, can you hear me now? It's
Karen's there.
Sorry, I was having technical problems then. Can you hear me okay? I was just going to say, in terms of the dashboard, we do have a dashboard which Strata have developed with us. Basically, what I did was I put all of the forms into firm steps so that we could get the management information out. And we do have a telephony report, which I have shared with Councillor Bailey. The issue with the dashboard is that we need further licenses for other users to be able to access it. And Strata are working on that at the moment. And they have been asked yesterday to get me costs. And then hopefully we can share that. I'm also working to put that data in a format that you can access quickly. And so you'll be able to see it. Basically what it does is it shows the sorts of calls that we're getting, how these are being dealt with by the community, but most of them, as Mark says, are for prescriptions and support with shopping and swapping apple pie recipes with lonely people. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I go to Councillor Rylance again, can I just remind members not to use the chat function for discussion and debate, please? Going back to Eleanor Rylance, thank you.
Hi everyone. I wanted to report back from the front line in Broadcliffe. We've been building resilience and reserves and the communication network in Broadcliffe for about 15 years. And so when the COVID struck, we had quite a lot of things in place already. We've now been permitted to act as a satellite food bank from Exeter Food Bank. And our observations recently have been that the need is very much growing quite fast right now. Our typical recent access to the food bank at the moment is young families with young children who may a few weeks ago have been living, quite reasonably, just about managing on 2 incomes, and maybe one or both is now unable to work and they have an interruption before they can access their benefits. And they are desperate. They cannot buy food for their children. So I don't know whether, Broadcliffe has a particular age profile that maybe other places don't have, but I just wanted to say that, we are observing this right now and that this is a growing phenomenon quite fast. And I don't know whether Mark can say whether this reflects what he's seeing, the kind of calls he's seeing coming into the hub, but I don't think we should assume that it's lonely older people necessarily who are becoming the needy customers, and also that it's our typical food bank user. Because, I mean, if we use food bank need as a measure, I think we've got a bit of a crisis looming probably across the whole district. I don't know if anybody else has any observations from their area, and I don't know whether Broadcliffe is unusual in the age range, but that's our observation at the moment, that it's growing week by week.
So I wouldn't gainsay any of that. I think you're right, and I think yesterday's figures around the numbers of universal claimants will only reinforce that. I mean, I see Tony's now next to me on the screen. I mean, he can give some examples of where. Certainly from a Honiton perspective, there were younger families and others coming into the food bank. So, and not necessarily the normal quote unquote type of customer that the food bank would deal with. So, yeah, I think you're right. And the longer this goes on, the more problematic it's going to be. And I think that's part of the big national debate. And I'm not saying what's right and what's wrong, but the big national debate about the relative weight or importance given to the economy versus the relative weight or importance given to health in terms of how the government sort of navigates its way through the next few months.
Okay, Councillor Brewster Sarah.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Yes, you touched on just now, Mark. I don't know whether it's something for John's team about the rough sleeping. Is there some best practices that the team can share with us for the future? Because obviously this isn't the sort of thing that will just disappear. It's a long-term problem, and I wonder whether we could use this opportunity to learn lessons as to how we can help the rough sleepers, because clearly it is a very national crisis. Thank you.
Does John want to come?
Yeah, if I may, Chair. So yes, we've been really successful in bringing everybody in as the campaign that the government launched is concerned. We always had a pretty good record with rough sleepers, I would suggest, relatively small numbers, and those that we are aware of, we've been engaging with consistently over the last few years and offering them accommodation. As Mark indicated earlier, there are 2 rough sleepers that we're aware of that have consistently refused accommodation, but we still work with them, we're still encouraging them. They know that the offer is there, and I think the key thing is once we move through the recovery phase, that government and local authorities have means of ensuring that rough sleepers and other homeless people that are accommodated are able to remain in accommodation. They remain housed. Thank you.
Thank you. Next with the blue hand is Councillor Eileen Wragg.
Thank you again on that rough sleepers theme. I've only just been messaged by a rough sleeper in response to a question I asked him about whether, because he messaged me last week to say that he was living between sofas, which was difficult because of the COVID crisis, and a tent. So I messaged him to ask if he had been contacted and offered accommodation, and he said yes, but drug dealers live at the same B&B. They offered me. I mentioned it to them, but they didn't care, so I didn't move in. So now they're now saying they only offer help once. I think this is an area that really maybe should need looking at in the future, because there are people I know, and I know from Gabriel House in Exeter as well, homeless people have refused to move in there because there are known drug dealers and drug users in there, and they're trying to kick their habit, and yet they're being, drawn back in. It's a very difficult one, and I've no doubt that work is being done with the other agencies. It's sometimes impossible problem to resolve. So I wondered if we could perhaps, focus on that in the future. And with regard to, as John said, we don't have a large number of rough sleepers. The cost shouldn't be too great. Resources shouldn't be too stretched to deal with this. Thank you.
I don't know if John needs to comment on that or not, but we just move on to the next question.
Chairman, could I just say that if Eileen could pass me the details of that particular rough sleeper, we'll make further contact and every effort to ensure that they're accommodated. Thank you.
Thank you, John. That is greatly appreciated. This is a young man who I've had contact with for about 3 years now, and I know that he has been trying very hard to get out of the situation he's been in. And I have managed to re-establish contact between him and his twin brother, you might know who I'm talking about now, and their mother.
I think we need to be careful getting into too much detail here.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong, I think you've got your microphone on, so we can just keep seeing you because
Yes.
your microphone's there.
Thanks. I can't. I don't know why it is, but I can't find the hands up thing on the screen. So that's why I was waving frantically. I just wanted to say to Eileen that I know that Gabriel House did have a reputation years ago for having issues about drugs and so on, and that goes back a long time. But I visited there a few months ago with one of the ex rough sleepers who is now accommodated, and it's completely different there. And we were shown round, and they have a zero tolerance policy to anybody with drugs and so on. So that is a possible option for people. I was really quite pleasantly surprised at the change since from a few years ago. So just to put your mind at rest on that one, I would feel reassured sending somebody there. But obviously it has to fit with their circumstances as well. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Megan. Next question, hand up, is Councillor Fabian King.
Thank you. I just wanted to raise three important soft issues about the hub, the support hub. I wanted to raise them because they're not easily measurable, but I think they're really quite important. One is that they helped the local community voluntary groups to go the extra mile, especially in the first few or the first period. And they helped to in my ward, it's sparsely populated and there are some very feudal hamlets, and they helped me go the extra mile to have my third, fourth, fifth attempt to try and crack them to get their representation. So that was appreciated. The second soft issue is that the hub helped the different groups more easily and therefore more readily connect with each other to share lessons, good ideas, and even access to resources. So it was a great catalyst in that respect. The third soft issue, got my numbers here. Yes, because coming in behind the list of contacts from the hub, there was a good dissemination of information, which not only informed the groups, but it helped to make them feel more included, which actually is really quite important when you consider the stamina and motivation that they need to sustain over a long period. And I just mention this because I say it's not easy to measure such things. I do think they're important, and I wanted to state them to help reinforce the resolve to keep the hub as a matter of high priority. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sure that feedback will be much appreciated. Going on now to Councillor Paul Arnott.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd just like to thank Mark very much for such a copious report, and I absolutely understand in the circumstances how it couldn't be a written one. And I'm delighted this scrutiny meeting has gone ahead today, despite the efforts of the Conservatives to prevent it from happening. So you'd expect me to say something political after that, and I'll ask a political question of Mark. Could you confirm how many conversations you've had with Simon Jupp, and how many conversations with Neil Parish since the crisis began? And do you believe that they understand and will act upon the financial crisis that has been caused for the District Council by the crisis and our looming deficit? And do you believe that they will personally lobby to help us in this? I'm mindful that you said you hope something might happen in the autumn, and I can quite understand why you're saying that. But you can imagine the trust is quite low in the government at the moment, particularly in the light of what has happened with the discharge of people from hospitals into nursing homes. So would you agree with me that we need to really, at this stage now, put some real pressure on Mr. Jupp and Mr. Parish to come to the District Council's aid financially? Thank you.
So politics. Okay, let's go back a bit. So in terms of contacts, we've had, myself and the former leader of the council have had weekly phone calls with Simon Jupp and with Neil. I know Neil quite well from a long time, so I've had regular calls and discussions with Neil. I haven't had any calls with Mel for Fabian's part of the Central Devon constituency. So if you're talking about Simon and Neil, they are both acutely aware of the need to make sure that the council can continue to deliver services, not just now, but into the future for our community and also for other areas. And I say that because, you know, the boundaries of the constituencies are that Simon is not only getting it from us, but he's also getting it from Exeter. And Neil is not only getting it from us, he's also getting it from Mid Devon. So there is a consistent message that is going to both those two MPs to say, you know, there is some serious stuff going on here. My personal view from an officer perspective is that the lobbying has been taken on board and has been effective. And the example I would give is with regard to the discretionary grant scheme for businesses. It has its limitations, but both the MPs were very interested in the fact that, you know, they were getting approaches direct from businesses saying, hang on a minute, you know, why can't we get money? And they wanted to understand the problem. We did prepare a schedule for those MPs, and that was taken on board and promoted through them. So I think, you know, as councillors, you may well have your own perspective on what more might need to be done. What I would say, I think from my perspective, from the officer perspective, is that actually the message that the Local Government Association has put at a national level to government, that message being built up brick by brick from local data from all the councils, and then prepared, or whether it's for district councils, whether it's for county councils through the two networks, that has been very effective in stopping any immediate problems from being manifested. We've all got an opinion about how much we might want to continue, and I think the bigger debate is around, you know, how is the country, stroke local areas, going to emerge into what is a new normal, or is the anticipation that we go back to what was normal before the virus struck? And I just think the jury's out on that. So I've absolutely no doubt that both MPs will be responsive to anything that this council puts forward and would want to be arguing hard for their area. I mean, that's what MPs do. So I've no doubt about that at all. I think the issue is how skillfully we can present the message to them in a way that they can see how they can hopefully achieve some wins for the area, as opposed to it just becoming, and I'm just saying this now as me, a political slanging match. That helps.
Thank you for that, Mark. Can I say, I mean, obviously Scrutiny itself is not a political forum, and I think, you know, the need for our MPs to support us at this time of economic strain would be the same irrespective of any political labels of any kind. And I think that's really important, that we just work with them as much as we can to push for support. And there may be room for a potential recommendation to continue to press for support in various areas to help us deal properly with our businesses and the vulnerable as a result of this crisis, which isn't going to go away anytime soon. Even if everybody comes out of lockdown and thinks it's over, the ramifications will roll on for a long time. I recognise time is moving on. We've got a couple of blue hands left, and also to remind people that, you know, there might be other aspects that you want to ask questions about. I realise we haven't covered yet impacts on our staff with sickness levels and whether that's resolved. I think there might be some questions about business rates, questions around universal credit perhaps, and the functioning of the wider hub with Devon County Council and the other bodies is an area that I think we might also want to touch on. So at the moment I can see two hands, both councillors have spoken before, so if you can keep your points brief, please. Councillor Jess Bailey.
Sorry, I just very quickly wanted to say that following on from Councillor King's comment that our hub had helped the voluntary groups connect with each other, I'm wondering whether as a district council we should be facilitating further discussions and arranging a Zoom meeting to enable the community groups to communicate with each other and to discuss ideas and to consider how they can improve their voluntary response. So that was the first thing. And the second thing I just very quickly wanted to say was I thought it was very interesting Councillor Rylance's comments about what she was finding in Broadclist, and I wanted to ask, that we can find a way of building in feedback as and when it arises into our hub so that we have a really clear picture of what's going on.
Oh, well, yeah, sure, absolutely. I mean, Karen's on the call, she's listening. I mean, that's certainly stuff we can do.
Thank you. Yes, I think that's a very good point about the feedback on the need for food banks, particularly, because that may accelerate as businesses start to go back and then decide to make people redundant. So we may find that's a particular issue. The one remaining blue hand at the moment is Councillor Vicky Johns.
Hi, thank you. So touching on what's been said in some respect, obviously at the moment we have got a lot of people going to food banks, etc., and a lot of people having to go over to universal credit. At the moment though, we have a lot of people that have been furloughed. Okay, we are in a high tourist area. We're also in a low minimum wage area. At the moment, a lot of people are furloughed on 80% of their wages. However, my understanding is that in August, the government have decided that they're going to change that. We're not sure exactly how they're going to change that yet, but I think it will lead to, regretfully, a loss of jobs, because I believe that they're going to ask their business owners to pay a higher proportion of that furlough scheme if they want to keep people furloughed. We are all aware of the fact that businesses local to us are struggling full stop. A lot of them won't be able to do that, and unfortunately they will probably have to close. The other problem that I think we're going to have is we're aware that the government are pushing for schools to reopen, etc. I will declare an interest. My daughter works in a school. Okay, so they're pushing for schools to reopen. Now, a lot of parents don't feel comfortable sending their children back to school. However, I believe, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that the way it is at the moment is if you are currently furloughed and they ask you to go back to work, however, you have children that are at school and you don't feel comfortable sending your children to school, bearing in mind that although care homes, etc., have been advised to use PPE, schools have not. Schools are not going to be issued PPE. Their staff are still going to be expected to try and keep those children 2 meters apart. I don't know if anybody here has ever tried to keep two children 2 meters apart. It's physically impossible if they don't want to be 2 meters apart. And if you've got 15 in a class, it's not going to happen. So a lot of parents are going to feel pushed to have to go back to work, because once the furlough ends or their business owners turn around and say, you have to come back to work, childcare is not deemed as one of those things where you have to, your employer has to keep you off. So I think we're going to have a big rise. Unfortunately, I think we are going to get a second wave, or in our case, a first wave. But also, more importantly, there's going to be a lot of parents out there that are going to have to weigh up the cost of whether to send their children back to school or lose their jobs if they've still got them. How is East Devon District Council going to help support those families at a time of crisis?
Well, I don't know is the answer to that. The situation with regard to schools is that my understanding is reopening of the schools in Devon will be voluntary, in the sense that it will be a decision for the governors of each school to take. It won't be something that's going to be mandated by the county council. The issue of childcare and furloughing, I think, is going to come down to individual decisions and individual choices. But I'm very clear that things are going to get worse before they get better. But as to what our capacity will be to deal with those wider societal issues, I honestly don't know. I think we just have to play it as best we can based on the information and the intelligence that's coming in, and our ability to divert resourcing and funding to help people out. But it is taking us, as a district council, into areas that we've never previously dealt with before. So all we can do is, if you like, inform our response from the things we know we can do and the things that we know we can do well, and then build on that in terms of where we have the capacity, the money, and the other resources to help out in a wider way. But there is only so much a district council can do, really.
Thank you. There's no more blue hands up at the moment, but perhaps you can give a summary of what the situation is with staff absence during this period. I have to excuse myself. I'm going to have to plug my iPad into power, so I'm going to turn my video off, but I'm not going away.
Okay, so generally then, moving on to the lockdown and its impact on the council. What we saw was that relatively quickly we closed Exmouth Town Hall because all the staff who were otherwise based or visited Exmouth Town Hall were able and capable of working from home. We've kept Blackdown House open throughout the period. And we've also kept the depots, the street scene depots, open throughout the period. That being said, the vast majority of staff have been working from home, and the only ones who have been going into Blackdown House have been staff who need to access equipment, printing equipment, that type of thing, as for part of their role, or otherwise are comfortable going into Blackdown House because for various reasons they don't want to work from home or feel they can't work from home. And we've adopted a policy of saying that we're not going to require people to attend the office, because a lot of our staff can work from home. The street scene staff have been more based at home and have attended the depots for the purposes of, getting equipment or getting materials so that they can carry on a more limited range of functions that we've been continuing with during the lockdown. So in terms of a stat, which is staff sickness, it's improved immeasurably compared to what was the case, by say April of last year. So I think what we'd find, and Karen can clarify some of this, is that working from home is actually good for staff. We're able to get the job done, and actually, you don't have the commute, you don't have the office environment, and all the issues that go with working in a workplace. On the softer side, we put a lot of effort, as you would hopefully expect, into trying to make sure that our staff, are still engaged, are still communicated with, and are still valued throughout this period of working from home and adjustment to the new normal. So managers have been, tasked with keeping in touch with their staff, communicating with their staff, and making sure that there aren't other issues, if you like, that impact upon their ability to do their job. We have furloughed a few, I think is about 25 or so, and that's because the government advice was not to go into widespread furloughing, if you like. Happily, hear from Karen, or she can contradict me if I've got any of this wrong. But by and large, the ship of state, if you like, has sailed on, and the services have been delivered, and the staff, in terms of morale and sickness, has not been adversely affected by the shift to working from home.
Okay, I can add to that, Mark, if you can hear me. So basically what I would say with regard to staff is, yes, the communication has had to, I've had to really step that up, and for the first 3 or 4 weeks I did daily communications to staff, which were letting them know what was happening on the front line in other service areas, and also helping them with well-being issues, with issues around working from home. Myself and my 2 HR business partners have been in touch with all of those colleagues who are shielding, or who are vulnerable, or who are looking after people who are shielding, and we've been supporting them with weekly phone calls to check that they're okay. We've also been doing some additional support with people who are trying to juggle work and home. Now, there are some people who have taken to working from home very well, and there are others who don't like it. So I have now modified the Work Smart principles so that people can go back into the office and ensure a safe place of work. And I'm working with health and safety colleagues and property services to make sure that our office is fully compliant in terms of being people being able to socially distance. And I've updated all the protocols in the Work Smart document that helps people understand that they shouldn't be sharing mugs, they shouldn't be sharing keyboards, they need to be wiping equipment down, etc. So there's lots of advice in that. So we've worked out that we've got a capacity of about 75 to 100 or 110 desks across Exmouth Town Hall and Blackdown House, so that we will monitor occupancy in our buildings, and for the time being the reception areas and the self-service areas for customers will remain closed. Thank you.
If I could just add to that, I mean, Karen's touched on it, which is this issue of actually what does the new normal mean for us as an organisation in terms of the capacity, the office, the physical infrastructure capacity we have to accommodate people. But that's also then going to roll out into the wider guidance, which we're assessing and the County Council is assessing, around what does it mean for the public highways, what does it mean for pavements, what does it mean for public areas, what does it mean for shops, in terms of how does society adapt to this ongoing requirement for social distancing. And there is a lot of work that's going to need to be done around that, in terms of what will your outside environment look like if it's going to be a COVID compliant outside environment, and that's that will be part of the general recovery work too.
Okay. Yes, and I think an important factor as people start to return to work and the council starts to meet again, is how we manage those people who are still vulnerable and still need to stay at home, versus those people that can more safely move back into the office, even with social distancing, because I think it's that mixture of people working at home and people being in the building that's going to be more difficult to manage. I have a question that's been raised with me about business rates for language schools. I understand that language schools haven't been able to qualify for business rate relief, if I understand that correctly. Can you clarify that perhaps, and comment if there's any opportunity perhaps for them to get some assistance?
I'd defer to Simon or Libby on this.
Hi, Chairman. There has been some discussion over language schools, and I don't have the information to hand, but I will happily get that back for you. I think from memory, they're not eligible to claim under the current schemes. So it's whether they would then be able to access under this discretionary top-up scheme. But I will come back with a response to you on that.
Thank you very much. I'd also like to ask a question about universal credit. Obviously, we've seen a massive increase in universal credit claims. Do we have any idea of what the number of has been, and also whether that's been going really smoothly, whether there are any delays, any issues with timings? I'm also thinking ahead that these claims are probably not going to slow down, and these are the most vulnerable, and we just want to make sure that everything's running as smoothly as possible.
Yes, I'm happy to answer that. We have regular updates with Department for Work and Pensions on a fortnightly basis. They are up to date with the claims in Devon. They're working on 1 day behind, so they're very up to date with the work. They're actually helping out other areas in the country with their claims. Over the total overall numbers that are currently on universal credit within East Devon are 6,779. That includes people who will not necessarily just be out of work, because you have those figures provided to you by Mark yesterday. These will be people that will be on low incomes in work as well. So that's the overall number. In comparison to February, that was 3,793.
Wow, yeah, that's quite an increase, and it's going to be interesting to monitor that, and for us to know. That's a quite worrying statistic. Thank you. There's a blue hand come up from Councillor Susie Bond.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to go back to the staffing issue. This section was the subject of staffing and how we're coping. And I just wanted, through the Chairman really, to send a message to the staff to thank them for all their hard work. It's been a huge change in working practices for them, either redeploying to different roles or changing completely and working from home in homes that aren't necessarily ideally placed to do that. So perhaps we could send a message from all councillors to thank the staff. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that. As I said at the beginning, I think we all recognise that everybody's been working really hard to provide the support, and it seems that we've done really well in so many areas. And I definitely want to thank everybody for all that hard work, those that we've seen out and about, particularly those people who are out on the streets as well, doing their job despite increased risk of infection in some situations. So that's really appreciated. Coming back to the Chief Executive, can I just ask, how has it been working overall with Devon County Council and the other partners in the hub? Has that gone smoothly? Has communication been as good as it could be? And also a related question, I heard a remark the other day that we might be required to pick up information from our care homes and feed that back. And I wonder if that is going to be the case and how we're going to manage with that task, because that isn't a sector that we as a district council are used to doing. Do you think that will be the district council, or will that be just left to county?
As a general comment, I would say that the interaction between ourselves and the county has been very good. There are weekly meetings of various types, whether it's been leaders and chief execs, whether it's been what we call Team Devon meetings, which particularly deal with the hub, for example. So, Devon County Council is a good council, and they are desperate to make sure that Devon as a place, sort of adapts well to everything that's been imposed upon it by COVID, if you like. The issue of care homes, that would be primarily through the county council, and again, this is where you don't know for sure exactly what the situation is from day to day, because it depends on what the government announces at its daily press conferences. But the discussion, well, there has been discussion around the freedom for local areas to prepare their own local outbreak plans. That then became sort of a directive that you should prepare local outbreak plans. But then the Prime Minister announced that actually everyone's going to be able to be track, trace and contact from the 1st of June. So we've got this problem that's bedeviled, the local response with the national edict, if you like, and that is being played out. So Devon collectively has volunteered to be a pilot area for preparing a local outbreak plan, and we may or we may not hear later today, I think, about whether Devon has been sort of accepted as one of the pilot areas. And the idea then would be that, is the government willing to give up some control around, how local lockdown occurs? So if, the county council is running through the public health team a system of test, trace and contact, that would be where we would be involved through our environmental health staff. But if we were part of that pilot, we would be developing policy in conjunction with government to say, the ongoing management of COVID until such time as a vaccine is found probably does require a more localized response, because I think the evidence is clear from around the country that one size doesn't necessarily fit all, and then we've got the problems of the fears, if you like, from our local areas of tourists coming down, second homeowners coming down, all that type of thing, which could bring the infection into an area which has been, relatively speaking, infection free. So it's an ongoing debate. We have asked, we have volunteered to sort of help try and develop the ability for there to be a local response to the matter. Whether the government lets that happen, I think remains to be seen. But they're going to have, well, this is a personal view now, obviously, but part of the problem of this country is that it's a highly centralized state. There's enough literature about it, about how Westminster runs things. So we do live in a highly centralized state. Is the government able, and it just may not be philosophically able, to let go, to sort of say that the management of life under a new normal requires a more localized response, and we're just going to have to see how that plays out over the next 2 to 3 weeks, or longer maybe. And I think that almost comes way straight back to where you started, Chairman, that if we are anticipating a second spike, bearing in mind we probably really haven't had a first spike yet in Devon, what will that mean, and will the hospitals be able to cope, etc. And the other issues that have played out around the country, how will they play out locally if the worst comes to the worst?
Okay. The second point I asked there, Mark, was about a comment about whether we ourselves would need to be contacting care homes to get information from them to feed back to government, or whether that will be done by county. Have you heard anything about that?
Oh, sorry. I thought I'd answer that. My understanding is it would be through county. County may ask us to help out, but I would imagine it would be through county, because they've been collecting the wider information around care homes and, you know, what's the rate of infection in care homes and all that type of thing. So yeah, we would offer to help out, I'm sure, but the expectation would be that they'd be the ones reporting on it back to government. So they'd be the ones expected to do it, but we would obviously help out if we were asked to.
Okay, thank you. Obviously, we're an area with a large number of care homes, so I'm particularly aware of that issue of trying to contact them and get information. There is one final item on the agenda that I want to get to before too long, but there's one hand back up again from Councillor Jess Bailey. Thank you.
Sorry, just one quick comment. I think it would be, we're category 1 responders with Devon County, and I think it would be helpful to have kind of more specific information in relation to the care homes in our district, in particular in relation to the kind of ongoing PPE situation, and also in relation to kind of levels of infection. So I don't know whether that can be kind of provided on a regular basis.
Well, the County Council does publish an awful lot on its website, and it also then gives that information to the county councillors, is my understanding. So I've always said that, you know, the first port of call should be through your county councillor. We can ask for that information, but, you know, the county councillors are going to be the people that would have that information to hand. And I don't know if, I mean, Councillor Chubb, for example, you're a county councillor, aren't you? I mean, I don't know if you got anything to add with regard to that?
No, I've not got anything much more to add to that, Mark. No.
Well, that was helpful. Okay, so yeah, so we'll ask. We'll see what we can get from them. But as I say, all they will give me, if you like, is information that is otherwise available to the county council.
Okay, very, very quickly, Councillor Vicky Johns.
Hi, I was wondering whether or not, I know we've spoken about this very briefly, the second homes thing with them getting the grants. Is there any way that I can propose that we lobby the government to look into a way that people that have got second homes down here and are using it as a saying that they're using it and using business rates, etc. Is there any way that we can do it so that they don't receive any further grants, etc.?
Well, the MP for Totnes, I think it was, picked this up about 4 weeks ago, maybe 5, and then South Hams had a bash at it. But the you know, the advice that came back from government was very clear that, you know, these were businesses that they felt were worthy of support. And I think the problem is going to be that, you know, the ship has sailed now in terms of, you know, stopping anymore, because, like I said, you know, the current scheme that we're administering, we're almost at sort of a closed down type situation very soon. So it will be, you know, should the government do a relaunch of the scheme, but I can't see that happening, because I just don't think they'll be able to afford it with the cost of furloughing continuing for quite some time.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and the fact that, you know, it's kind of closing the gate after the horse has already bolted, so to speak. However, is there, you know, I just think it is something that is quite important. There are a lot of second homes in our area, as we're all aware, and it's taking money away from people that live in the local area to go to places that aren't in the local area. So I would like to propose it as something that East Devon District Council does, that we lobby the government to turn around and say that if there is anything in the future that comes up, that second homeowners aren't eligible for that because they're not a business technically.
Thank you for that. I think we're at that point as well now at the end of that presentation. Thank you to the Chief Executive for that comprehensive overview. I know there's been a lot, but I think it's been extremely useful. Recommendations. It sounds as though Vicky would like to make that as a recommendation from Scrutiny. Henry, do you have a suggestion as to how that could be worded as an acceptable recommendation?
Well, I think it's been pretty much said. It would just be that the council lobbies the government so that in the future any schemes to fund businesses does not include second homeowners or properties owned by second not by second owners, properties that are second homes. I think just leave it at that.
Okay, can I have a seconder for that recommendation, please, from one of the committee members?
I'd second that one.
Thank you, Tony.
Yeah.
Okay, do we need to take that vote on that one now, please?
Well, I mean, are there going to be any others?
Okay, would anybody like to make any other recommendations about pressing government for financial support, for example, for our small businesses, for helping to house people, that kind of aspect? If any members feel that's a good idea, please wave your hand, blue hand, please. No, that's fine. Oh, no, two hands have now gone up. Vicky Johns and Eleanor Rylance. Do you want to comment on those? Thank you.
Shall I go first? Shall I go first?
Yes, off you go, Eleanor.
Okay. So, well, if we are going, well, okay. So, responding to COVID seems to one of the biggest powers that we have is by keeping our bubbles small. It seems, and it seems to me that as a way of dealing with COVID, we should be looking at more power and more activity happening from local authorities at local level, rather than it being centralized, as Mark said. So I think we should be lobbying government for devolving those powers down to local authority level and really as low as they can practicably go. And I think we should be lobbying them for that as well. And obviously, with that request should come a request for funding for such. So I'd like to propose that we in our list of lobbyings that we add that we should devolve COVID response from a public health point of view to the lowest possible level at which it could be done well.
With associated funding.
Can I just ask how that practically works? I mean, in the sense of what lobbying government, I mean, it's going to be a bit more directed than that, I would have thought, wouldn't it? Because essentially it's devolved to the county currently, so there's only 2 more tiers to go. I mean, it's unlikely that the parish is going to have the capability. I appreciate the funding request. So, you know, are you effectively saying that it must be to the district or to the parish?
No, I didn't hear it as that, Henry. I heard it as, you know, how public health is currently organised, but greater local discretion for the directors of public health.
That is what I meant. I mean, it just seems more practicable to run these things at a local level, especially with the very different rates of infection across the country. And I think, I mean, I can't imagine there's any region in this country across a landmass that wouldn't think it would be a good idea to run these things more locally, rather than us all sitting at 5 o'clock every day waiting for the words from on high that don't necessarily apply to our specific area. So I suppose, I mean, we're all sailing in uncharted waters, really. But and I know, as Mark said, that the government has got some resistance to devolving any power at all to local level, and which they operate very effectively by cutting the funding. And I suppose what I'm really arguing for is that we have more funding and more powers to deal with COVID, and that's what we should be lobbying for.
Okay. And Henry, are you comfortable that we can write something around that? Vicky, is your point around this idea?
Yeah, so basically going exactly against what Councillor Rylance has just said, at the moment, government are doing a one-size-fits-all, basically. So whatever they're deciding is at government level. So whatever they're deciding for London, we'll also do Exeter, we'll also do Bristol, etc., etc. We are fully aware of the fact that East Devon is a beautiful place to live, and it is not a one-size-fits-all category. And unfortunately, if nothing else, COVID has brought to our attention that it's not a one-size-fits-all. I mean, even a couple of weeks ago, the chief inspector at Exeter police station turned around and said that, you know, the government are saying one thing, and they do not even have the powers that they should have to stop things like people coming down. The government have raised legislation so that you can go out for the day, but you cannot go to your second homes. However, once you're in your second home, the police do not have the powers to turn you around and send you back again. It's too late. The other thing with a lot of second homes is that if there's two people in that marriage or relationship, they will have a home each in each name. So once they're down at that home and they've got a driving license with that name on it, the police do not have the powers to turn them around and send them back. You know, and the government have basically at the moment, it's a one size fits all. We've decided this and it's the same across the country. You can't do that. It's not the same across the country. At the moment, we have low levels of infection, touch wood, because we have been very good at social distancing. We have the advantage that we're a rural area. We have the advantages, as awful as it sounds, that our public transport isn't as good as it could be. But because of that, a lot of people walk, cycle, take their own cars to work, etc. However, as we've seen on the news recently, lockdown hasn't been lifted, but unfortunately it's open to people's interpretation and the government's idea of people will use their common sense. Yet it doesn't seem to be working quite so well as they think. We've seen that by Saunton Sands yesterday, absolutely inundated. Traffic warden ran out of tickets, apparently. You know, and these kinds of things. So I agree completely with Councillor Rylance that we need to try as much as possible to bring the power down more to this level, especially in a crisis situation like this.
Okay, thank you. So I think we have two ideas for recommendations if Henry's happy with what we've got. So we've got a second homes recommendation and one about devolving powers to give us more opportunity to manage our response locally and associated funding. Is that correct, Henry?
Yes, that's what I got. I mean, there's no problem with the wording in terms of lobbying the government to devolve the public health response to the appropriate tier. I guess it's going to be more around the practicalities of it, isn't it? Bearing in mind they've got to try and deal with a national picture as well. So yes, by all means, lobbying if it's felt appropriate by this committee on that basis, that's fine. I just wonder how practical it would actually be in real terms, but that's for another day, I suspect.
Okay, so we had a proposer and a seconder for the second homes part of that. Do we need a separate seconder for the devolution of powers element?
Well, I think if the committee is willing to vote just to include it, then you don't need a seconder. We can just take the recommendations on block.
Okay, I think that makes sense. Okay, can we go to a vote now, please?
This will also be done by roll call. Could members of the committee please unmute their microphones?
So just be absolutely clear then. So the first one is to lobby government so that any future grant schemes don't include grants to second homeowners. And then the second one is lobbying government to devolve public health response to appropriate tier or tiers and to provide appropriate funding to enable that to happen. And you'll be asked whether you are for, against, or whether you abstain. Thank you.
Councillor Maddie Chapman.
For.
Councillor Ian Chubb.
For.
Councillor Andrew Coleman.
For.
Councillor Bruce Desaram.
For.
Councillor Cathy Gardner.
For.
Sorry, Councillor Gardner.
For.
Councillor Vicky Johns.
For.
Councillor Tony McCollum.
For.
Councillor Val Ranger.
For.
Councillor Eleanor Rylance.
For.
Thank you. Unanimously for.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the Chief Executive once again and to everybody for participation on that item. There's one last comment to be made before we close the meeting. Agenda item 9, update on the car parking task and finish forum. I just want to say that the car parking TAF has met 4 times before lockdown and had agreed terms of reference at a meeting on the 7th of November 2019, when an approach was adopted to consider issues in each of the main towns of the district before proceeding. There are links to previous meetings in the agenda so that members can view progress to date and consider the original terms of reference and priority themes. I know that Councillor Ranger had sent out some information about the car parking TAF earlier on as well. Following the appointment of a new administration, it's very likely that membership of the TAF will change and the group will need to meet again and regroup effectively as soon as possible. This is a priority area for the council because car parking is linked both to our revenue and also to our carbon reduction target. And I think it might be useful if Councillor Ranger just makes a very brief comment on the remit as it started off for the TAF before we draw the meeting to a close. Val, are you still there after your power cut?
Yes, thank you. Sorry about that. So just looking back then at the terms of reference, originally they were asset management, communities, looking after our communities, economy, the statutory requirements, the climate change emergency, and equality and health and well-being issues. And they're not in any particular order or ranking. So in my opinion, those terms of reference have not changed. I have sent out a spreadsheet this morning with an update. I think that's more easy to read on what we've achieved so far. And yeah, I think the sooner we can get back on that, the better.
Thank you very much for that. And we look forward to the new TAF meeting as soon as possible to get on with that subject. We can't obviously have a discussion about car parking in any way at this meeting today. I see Councillor Maddie Chapman has raised a hand. Is this an additional comment, Maddie?
Yes, please. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
My worry is we've had low infection, but now the government have said that people can get in their cars and go out for the day. With the summer coming up, I'm worried about an influx of camper vans and campers before all the campsites are open. Knowing how many camper vans we get in Exmouth along the seafront and everywhere else, and how close they are together, can someone assure me that the district council will look at this before the influx happens and before we get a lot of infection being brought down to the southwest? Because we've had such a low infection rate, I have a feeling a lot of people will say southwest is quite safe, let's go down there, and we're going to get inundated with people.
I think the Chief Executive has had to leave the meeting, but I think John Golding might still be attending. But I think that's going to be a matter, obviously, for our perhaps to put out a press release about that, as well as labelling in our car parks, which is going up as well. Is John Golding still there?
Yes, Chair, I'm here. We are acutely aware of that potential. Of course, the current government advice is that people shouldn't be staying overnight, so there may be an enforcement role for us. We are looking at how we accommodate, or how we might accommodate in the future in our own car parks. So of course, parking on the seafront is a Devon County Council issue, so we'll be working closely with county as well. So it is a real concern. The police are concerned about that. We've already seen some illegal parking where police and ourselves have moved people on.
Okay.
Chair, I can comment on comms if it helps.
Yes, please. Thank you, Karen.
Basically, just to say that we're working with the Local Resilience Forum and Devon County Council together to support the Think Twice campaign and other campaigns about people thinking twice before they come over, and reminding them that they shouldn't be staying overnight in any other accommodation. And we will continue that, especially with the bank holiday and the half term coming up. So we're stepping up our social media and our campaigns to make sure we make that clear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That brings our meeting to an end, and I'd like to thank everyone, including any members of the public watching online, for taking part. Could I remind everyone in attendance that the Democratic Services Officer host will now end the recording and live streaming on YouTube, and until she confirms that this has happened, please remember that you are still live and your comments can be heard. Thank you.